when you think of the most popular character for English literature for young children and adults, who do you remind me of? Here's a clue. He's a sheep. Leo, the sheep.
That means I'm the lion of the sheep. Leo, sheep.
When Walt Disney first started plans to do an animated feature of Leo the sheep in 1912, he realized that there were a lot of remarkable things happening when he first started out on his first film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, in 1939. And when Lime Frank Baum first published his first book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, Walt was inspired by Lime Frank Baum to do an animated version of Leo the sheep in the year of January the 10th, 1921. To start out our behind the scenes feature of Leo the sheep, here is my good friend Frank Thomas, played by my dad, to tell you why Lime Frank Baum started publishing 4 of his beloved books of Leo the sheep in the earliest of the 1940s. And here is Frank Thomas to talk to you about Lime Frank Baum's classic children's stories of Leo the sheep in 1912. Frank?
Corey, right?
Yes, Corey.
You gotta know who your host is. Corey, it is an honor to be back on your program.
You're welcome.
My eyesight's failing. That's why I wasn't sure it was you or not. But I thought I recognized the voice, and I knew the studio I was in, so I figured it was you, and I was right. Thank goodness. Well, Frank loved to write children's stories, and he was very good at it, and it came easily to him. I know for a fact that it was easy for him to write children's stories, just like it was for A.A. Milne. I know this for a fact. And so he wrote his first children's story for his children, and actually at the time he only had one child, his little boy Frankie, and he would read it to him as a bedtime story, and his wife and Frankie thought it was just marvelous. And so then he and his wife had their second child, Francine, and he decided to write another sequel for her. And, you know, this is how it went. They had their third child, they had their fourth child. He wrote 4 books, but, you know, he never published them. They were just his stories for his kids. Well, then, one day he was reading the 4th book to his 4th child as a bedtime story when they had company, and the company happened to be the president of a big publishing house. And he was listening to the story being read, and after Frank was done and he put his 4th child in bed and rejoined the conversation with the adults, the publisher said, "Frank, what was that wonderful book you were reading? I'm not familiar with it, but it was fascinating." Frank said, "Well, it's my book. It's the 4th one I wrote for my kids." And the publisher said, "No way! You wrote that?" And Frank said, "Yes, I did." And the publisher said, "Well, how would you like to publish that book?" And Frank said, "I never thought about doing that. This is just a book for my children." He says, "Well, I think all the children of the world deserve to read this book, and let's publish all 4 of them, because if the other 3 are as good as this one, I think we're on the bestseller list for sure." And that is how Frank came to publish his books.
In 1941, Mark Davis had the happy task of drawing Leo the sheep to magically to life when Lion Frank Baum started publishing his first book in 1909. Shortly afterwards, Mark Davis needed some inspiration from Mr. Disney in 1902, but there was a problem, because as you can see, as Walt Disney mentioned in his earlier storyboards of the late 1950s to the early 1960s, Mr. Disney wanted Mark Davis to do what he does best, as in to draw a popular character of the English literature. And now, here is Mark Davis, played by my dad, who will tell you how he draw the character of Leo the sheep in 1901. Mark?
Well, first of all, Corey, I am so pleased to be on your show for the first time. I don't think I've ever been on it before, have I?
You've been on the show for a few times.
I have?
Yes.
Oh, see, this is what happens when you get to be 102 people. Your memory starts to go. I know I've watched Corey's show many, many, many times, but I don't recall being on it. But if I have been, then it's good to be back. So, where was my inspiration for drawing Leo the sheep? I'll tell you where it came from. One night, I had too much coffee that day, and I was just lying in bed at night trying to go to sleep, and the caffeine was just coursing through my brain, and I just couldn't fall asleep. So I said, I'm going to try the oldest trick in the book. I'm going to count sheep. So I closed my eyes, and I started counting. 1, ba, 2, ba, 3, ba. And my wife, who was sound asleep when I started this project, woke up and said, "Mark, count to yourself. You're counting out loud and you're bleating like a sheep. I can't get back to sleep myself." And Mark said, "Okay." So he had to zip his lips and be quiet so his beautiful wife, who he called Swambo, could go back to sleep. That's she who must be obeyed, Swambo. And he just had to think in his mind what a sheep looks like, and what it sounds like, and what it looks like when it's jumping. And that's how he conceived of Leo the sheep. He conceived of the sheep that had a mane like a lion, and that's why he called him Leo. And that's a true story. Why I called him Leo.
Now before Walt can get to now before Walt Disney can introduce the musical score that was done in 1931, the dialogue is recorded. Casting this picture brought out of America's amazing young cast of talented actors and actresses. And here to tell you a little bit about who Walt Disney cast for this animated motion picture based on the books by Lime Frank Baum. Here is Leonard Maltin, played by my dad, who will tell you some of the actresses and young actors who played their roles in the late 1970s through the earliest of 1981. So here's Leonard Maltin to tell you about some of the voices for this motion picture. Leonard.
Well, Corey, it's good to be back. Unlike your last guest, Mark, I remember being here many, many, many times. So I'm glad to be back. I'm honored to be back. Well, Mr. Disney is pretty peculiar about the voices for his animated characters. So I had to really, really put on my thinking cap and scratch my head and ponder and think who would be the best and everything else, because you don't see their faces, you just hear their voices. And this creates some complications, believe it or not. You'd think it would be easier, but it's not. So I'm thinking Leo the lion.
You mean Leo?
I mean Leo the sheep. But first I thought Leo the lion, because big king of the jungle and whatnot. So this is Leo the sheep,
yes,
with the, the fur collar and everything else. And I thought, who would be perfect? De Niro. Robert De Niro.
And could you, Mr. Maltin?
Yes.
Could you please tell our young audience why Robert De Niro got the part by Mr. Disney himself?
Well, I suggested De Niro to Mr. Disney. And Mr. Disney sat back and he thought and he pondered and he was trying to conjure up De Niro's voice in his head. And he looked me in the eye and he said, "You know what, Leonard? I'm going to trust your judgment on this one. I can't quite see De Niro playing Leo the sheep, but you are far more talented in this area than I, and so I'm trusting your judgment. So you just let me make the decision.
And what about some of the other stars that portray some of the other sheep in this animated film?
Okay, well, there's Billy Crystal.
Billy Crystal
Yeah.
as
He played Leo's son, Leonard.
Oh, Leonard.
Yeah, named him after me, myself. Then we had Julie Andrews, because we had a singing role for Leo's girlfriend, and we called her Julia.
Now, this is Julie's third animated motion picture, because she did, well, actually this is her second,
The third one hadn't been done yet, had it?
right,
Yeah.
she's done two films
Yeah,
from
yeah.
Walt Disney Pictures, Mary Poppins
Mhm.
and Leo the sheep.
That is correct. And then, last but not least, for Leo's daughter, Sylvia, Goldie Hawn.
Goldie Hawn.
She was just perfect for the role. And then, there are so many other sheep in the flock, but we are running out of time because we have to post this to YouTube, and there is a limit.
Dad, the host would like to say one more thing before we wrap this up and put it on YouTube.
But of course,
By the earliest of the 1800s, Mr. Wolfgang Reitman will talk about the music that has been composed by Basil Papadouris, who has scored such music to films like Free Willy and The Jungle Book.
Yeah.
And here, finally, to end our behind the scenes look at the making of Leo the sheep, the story behind the masterpiece, here is Wolfgang Reitman to talk to you a little bit about Basil Papadouris' work ever since his two films, The Jungle Book and Free Willy. Here you go, Wolfgang Reitman.
well, thank you, Corey. I'm honored to be on your program. Basil is just one of the most accomplished composers of our modern times. I'm honored to have known him ever since grade school. He and I went to grade school together. And at that time, I was a bit of a bully. And Basil, he was just into his music and whatnot, even in grade school. And so I used to pick on him quite a bit. But you know what? Basil stood up to me. And he wouldn't let me bully him. And, you know, because of that, I respected him and we became good friends. And I quit my bullying ways and I became interested in music. And one thing led to another, and when Mr. Disney said, "Who do you think should do the musical score?" I said, "Basil, of course." And that's how Basil got to do the music.
All right, we thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in to our special behind the scene episode of Leo the Sheep, the story behind the masterpiece, but we're out of time, so I hope you join us again for our next episode, which is going to be Danny the codfish. The magic behind the masterpiece. So join us next time, and goodbye.
Goodbye, ta-ta, cheerio, farewell, arrivederci, au revoir, a biento, bye-bye. Ah! Woo! That's a wrap, Vic.
Yes.